us who you are for the record.
Good point. Richard Schwartz, S-C-H-W-A-R-Z. I'm Executive Director of AFT Oregon, the State Federation for Affiliates of the American Federation of Teachers in Oregon. And among those substantial numbers of public employees we represent are those in the higher education system, including faculty and teaching staff. In essence, this is about the election, the ballot that's used in the election procedure. The Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act has been around for more than 35 years now and has been used for representation for the rights granted public employees in that time through an election process that is similar to any election. Choices are on a ballot, employees mark their choice, and the majority determines the outcome. The core rights that they're exercising are in Section 243-662, which is the right to form, join, and participate in union activities of labor organizations. And the way that that choice is made is first through authorization cards, and then where there is contested issues before the Employment Relations Board, who processes those representation petitions. Contested issues are, for example, the whether or not certain positions are supervisory or not, or certain positions don't fit the general definition of the bargaining unit that is forms the voting group in representation. Those in the technical term used, give rise to a question of representation, and the questions of representation are settled through an election, the election process that's provided in the statute. Typically, the election that's laid out in the board's rules are for a ballot and is determined by a majority vote designation. If there are more than two choices on the ballot, then if there is no majority of votes cast for any one organization, then there's a runoff election by the top two vote getters. No representation is always one of the choices. So if a union is seeking to represent, or employees are seeking to have a union represent them, then it's that choice of that union or no representation. If there are interveners or other unions petitioning for the same group of people, then there's more than one choice of representative on the ballot along with no representative. The anomaly here is for faculty working in institutions under the Oregon State Board of Higher Education. Faculty are the only group that is required to use, and there's a separate procedure for the construction of the ballot and determination of the outcome, they're required to use a two-part ballot or double ballot. The first question on the ballot is whether or not they choose to be represented by a labor organization for purposes of collective bargaining, and the choice is yes or no. And on my written testimony that I've submitted there, I've given three examples of representation election notices along with the sample ballot. The first one is for a unit of classified employees at a community college. That's attachment A. Attachment B is for a unit of faculty at a community college. And the third is the type of ballot that we're talking about here today, and that's the double ballot or two-part ballot that's used for faculty in institutions under the Oregon State Board of Higher Education, the university system, essentially. So in that, they have to, unlike all other employees and all public employees in all other settings, and unlike employees, including universities and colleges in the private sector under the National Labor Relations Act, this unique provision segregates out the method in which balloting occurs for those for faculty in the higher ed system. So the two-part ballot asks first the question whether or not they wish to be represented, and then it gives the instruction, regardless of how they checked that, whether even if they checked no, they don't want to be represented, they get a second question, and that is a listing of one or more labor organizations that they may be seeking to have represent them. So that can produce a lot of confusion among faculty in voting, because most people, they think if we mark yes, I want to be represented for collective bargaining, that takes care of it. But they need to mark the second part, and in some cases they don't mark the second part. Or they could not mark the first part and go ahead and pick the organization, because that's, after all, who they're seeking to have represent them in the second part. But a failure to mark the first part, that yes or no they want representation, would void their ballot even if they picked an organization in the second part. So you can get a lot of permutations, and we've seen most of them, and some could even occur in the extreme where they would mark, yes, they want representation, but then fail to mark any organization on the second part. So the solution to this is just to provide the faculty and higher ed system with the same type of ballot that's used by and has been used by tens of thousands of other public employees under the state's Public Employee Collective Bargaining Act. We've had experience with all three of these ballots. I've had experience with the elections in over 30 years in public sector in numerous states, and in the private sector, and process cases in over a dozen National Labor Relations Board regional offices, and under the Federal Labor Relations Authority for federal employees. So that's the nature of the issue, and our desire is to see that same right extended in the form of the ballot to faculty of the higher education system. And with that, I'm happy to entertain any questions you have.
Thank you for that explanation. Any questions for these witnesses? No, it doesn't look like there are. And
I'm trying to figure out how